This is the Fox Factory Series truck, and we got a chance to see it in action in the desert in a Cotillo here a couple weeks ago. And in this video, we're gonna deep dive and cover all the good, the bad, what this truck is, what this truck isn't. We got shots of it actually hitting the trails. Yeah. We both got to drive it.
What'd you do?
And we're gonna give you guys our thoughts and what we think of it and give you guys an honest review on this truck. And show you guys how does this stack up to the market leader in this segment, which is the Raptor. Hey guys, hello, we keep it dirty off-road. This YouTube's all about DIY content, show you guys how to work on your Raptors. We bring you guys along for the adventures, and sometimes we do reviews of other trucks and products and builds. With me, I got Josh.
Josh Burney. I'm a independent photographer, automotive photographer. I've got over a decade of experience in the industry, general parts of it, everything from a technician to the aftermarket. It was really cool to, get to sit down and kind of dig into this truck.
And your dad was actually the one that hooked us up with the event.
Yeah. No, he's kept in touch with some of the guys at Fox over the years. He's got a couple of Raptors he's had. It's nice enough to have the guys have us out, go over there and, check this thing out.
And this event, they advertised it as a media-centric event for VIP customers. And it was supposed to be like an experience with the truck so that potential customers can really see the truck, get under it, and experience it. And during this demo, they had two demos. I think they originally promised 3, but they had 2 demo trucks. These were both prototype trucks, were fully built out and ready to test. It's basically the test mules that they were using.
Yeah, we attended the second day of their kind of all-inclusive event where they, let us get up and close personal with it. They invited some media out, some special guests. It was a good up close and personal type of event to see the truck and get a full rundown.
Now, I do want to do a couple of disclaimers here, right? These are prototype trucks. These were the test mules that were used to develop all the parts that's going to go into the Fox Factory Race Series truck. Some of the stuff you're going to see on here is not actually what's going to make it onto the truck. It's a lot of pre-production parts. Now, one of these trucks has been tested really hard and has over 18,000 test miles on it, and it does show.
Yeah.
It's been tested to the max.
Absolutely.
We're not paid for this event. Fox doesn't have any feedback into what we're going to say here in this video. We were just invited. We're both kind of enthusiasts. I've been waiting for GM to release a Raptor competitor. So this was my opportunity to finally see it, right? A Raptor version truck, kind of production truck with an LS engine. It's huge.
Full disclosure from Fox and the other associated partners, it's not to be a Raptor competitor per se, but I would describe, me personally, my opinion, it's like their interpretation as an aftermarket carrier, what the manufacturer could do.
Now, this truck was also put together by a very passionate team. It wasn't just Fox Factory that did this. There was a couple other companies involved. Brenthal's was involved, Methods. They even had a lot of third-party companies involved. So this is just a passionate team that really wanted to see this build happen. Basically, the whole mantra of this team was, since GM didn't build it, they decided to do it themselves, and I guess rather be late than never.
Absolutely. I think it was a collaborative passion project for the guys at all these different companies to make, what they, in theory, maybe would want to see.
Now, the facility that did this on, it's a kind of a cool little facility. It's only been open for a few years. It's in Ocotillo, California, and they call it the Marking Proving Grounds. It's actually named after John Marking, who is one of the founders of the company, and he's also like one of the major patent holders. So a lot of his ideas were patented, and it's what Fox is built on. So.
Got a brief rundown of what John Marking did, kind of the patents and things he brought into the off-road, we'll call it performance shock industry. Some of the things he was the originator of, inventor of, patent holder too.
This is where Fox actually is doing all their field testing these days, which is pretty cool, right? They're actually testing it hard in the desert.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a quick deep dive on what this truck is. This is all the specs. I'm going to try to run through this as quick as I can. I do have a ton of notes for myself here. This is just kind of get everybody up to speed on what it is. We will have a separate video of kind of like the presentation that they gave us with all the details. It's a little bit longer video, it's about an hour. So let me just kind of go through quick rapid fire on what this is. The benchmark for this truck was the Gen 3 Raptor. The base truck for this build is the Chevy Silverado RST full-wheel drive with a 6.2 liter engine. They did do a 3-liter supercharger for up to 700 horsepower. That I also upgraded the heat exchanger, and they had to upgrade the transmission cooling. The suspension is Baja Kit's long travel. I don't know why they call it long travel. You guys know how I feel about long travel. It's not long travel, it's mid travel, if that. Double A-arm design up front with 14.5 inches of travel. 4-linked in the back with 15.5 inches of travel back there. It does have caster camber locks on all 4 corners in the front end. And then there is some additional bracing there as well. There's a strut brace over the front, and then there's 2 braces in the back to kind of stiffen that up. It is using Fox's new 3.2 factory race series dual live valve shocks. They're both coilovers. They're using custom progressive springs. They do have compression and rebound control with actually new valves too. They're a little bit different than the stock ones you guys see on the Raptor. They're very similar to the Raptor shocks. It's just the FRS version of the Raptor shocks with better cooling, right? More oil volume and all that stuff, and two different kinds of valves. It has hydraulic bump stops, both front and rear. The front one is hooked up with the slapper arm. It is running RCV axles up front. It's running a Dana 60 rear axle that's geared to 3.73 with ARB air lockers. Steering, it is the stock electronic steering with extended tie rods. They also added a steering dampener, and I think what they said was to control wheel shake under heavy braking.
Yeah, I mean, we got to see some prototypes, which we'll cover later in the video, but it's essentially, you know, a standard Fox shock with a remote reservoir that they use to dampen some steering forces.
There is a live valve controller. It's a dedicated ECU. They have position sensors on every shocks, which is very new. That's not even on the current stock Raptors. 6-axis IMU sensor that's kind of like a position and accelerometer sensor. It's got a dash control panel with 6 buttons on it. It has the drive modes control on that touch panel that they call the touch point. And then it has 6 buttons, but 3 of them are actually already taken up. There's 2 buttons for the nacho lights that come standard with the truck, 1 for the air locker, and then they have 3 pre-wired accessories that are already actually wired in the truck. One's in the bumper, one's in the engine bay, and then one's already pre-wired to the back of the truck for the rack. And then what's cool too is the ECU also comes with an app. So it's not just a little control on the side. You get an app to allow you to do more control, be able to get real-time telemetry data, and something cool is real-time mapping, which we're going to talk about later. It does have built-in diagnostics for support. So if something's not working, the app can tell you what's not working. The biggest feature is it's got over-the-air updates, which is pretty cool. Now, running off the rest of it, it's got carbon fiber fenders on all 4 corners. It's got high clearance steel bumpers front and back that are a lot like stock. So if you like kind of like the stock styling, it has the steps and everything built into it. 37-inch tires on 17-inch methods, speed grips. Good choice on tire. It does have onboard air with an air chuck in the engine bay as well, and that also controls the lockers. Yeah. Factory fit and finish was something that they really highlighted. They wanted to make sure that this thing was really well put together. 3-year, 36 bumper-to-bumper warranty on everything. So just the truck and all the aftermarket components. And then the powertrain has a 5-year, 60K warranty, which includes that rear Dana 60 axle. Yeah. They are going to limit it to 500 trucks in 2024 for this first production. Everything on the truck, and I mean everything, is bolt-on. 100% bolt-on, no welding whatsoever, for an MSRP of $209,000. Now, we're going to talk about price at the end of the video because I kind of have a different take on this.
There's some theories and some reasoning on why the price might be what it is, and we can get into that.
And we're going to talk about it too, but I think it's important to talk about all the other stuff on this truck first. What is this not? This is not a pre-runner, right?
No.
This is not a fully caged truck. This is not a pre-runner. This is as close to what GM should have brought out to compete with the Raptor. It's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's also not a fully custom build, right? The suspension is what it is. Fenders is what it is. I don't even think you can get a custom interior. You might have some options on the interior, but they didn't go over it too much.
So for the Fox Factory Edition, they did have some different material they used on the interior over the seats and such like that. But generally, it's going to be that GM Chevy Silverado interior.
So like if you wanted more suspension travel, that's not an option. The suspension is what it is. The bed rack, they have a few options that we're going to talk about, but it's not, there's not too much you can customize on it, right?
Yeah.
It is not a fully customized build like you would expect. This is also a production style truck. One of the big key drivers for this project was worldwide shipping. They needed to have the ability to ship it worldwide. In order to do that, everything had to be crash tested and all that stuff. That also meant they couldn't touch the current frame, right? The frame had to stay as is. Let's start kind of going over the good and the bad of this thing. And I think the best feature to me of this truck was that engine. It's just awesome.
I agree. The engine, the way the power was delivered with that supercharger from Whipple, I think it really complemented having that travel, having everything else like that. It really makes that much of a difference over that standard 6.2 that they throw in there.
Yeah, and when we were going on the trails, there was no lag whatsoever. There was no waiting for the truck to spool up. It was just power on demand. It was really, really nice. Yeah. Really nice.
Absolutely.
You know, and to me, that's probably the best feature by far because LS engines, especially the 6.2, is a more peppy engine than the Ford engines. No offense to them, I've been driving them for years, but the 6.2, they're the epitome of lazy V8s. Whereas, you know, the GM engines has always have a little bit of pep, right? They want to get up and go. I don't know. To me, you could feel that on the trails. It felt really good. There was no waiting. There was no kind of pre-planning on your throttle. It was there. Power on demand. It was on tap. It was awesome.
And I'd say that's something GM's really experienced with. They know how to build a good V8. And I think everybody knows that.
Yeah. They did have to do some changes for that too, right? So like the stock oil is 0W20. Because of the supercharger and all that stuff, it's 5W40 now.
Yeah, they're running a different weight.
And then the interval is different too, right? They recommend the first one will be at 3,000 miles after you get the truck, and then every 5,000 miles after that. And then there's an extra heat exchanger up front that's mainly for the supercharger to keep it cool. It's not an intercooler, even though everybody calls it an intercooler. It's a heat exchanger. It's got coolant in it. Its whole purpose is to keep the supercharger cold. But one thing, you kind of asked about this, and I'm glad you did. Mm-hmm. The engine's internals are completely stock. They just bolted the Whipple supercharger on top of it.
Yeah, and I think they avoided making a lot of mechanical changes to the engine just in terms of compliance and keeping it factory.
Smog and all that stuff.
Yeah, everything else. To get that compliance, they messing with that too much beyond some bolt-on parts like we said. It's going to change it.
That to me is the best feature, without a doubt. The engine, I haven't driven the 5.2 supercharged Raptor engine yet. I do want to try it. But, it's hard to get people to let you drive an R. We were surprised to let us drive this thing.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great opportunity. But I think just kind of piggybacking off of keeping the engine mechanically similar to the factory configuration allows for service over time, things like that. I mean, that was really the goal here.
One of the key things that I think he brought out is serviceability. It needs to be serviced at any GM dealer.
Yeah.
And that was key for them. That was a major requirement for the project. Another big part that they talked about a lot on this is all the time they spent tuning this thing, right? And shock tuning was a big part of it. According to the presentation, they did a ton of changes on this thing. According to the presentation, they did 98 changes up front and 90 changes in the rear. And what they mean by a change is they actually took the suspension out and made a change. Whether it was a revision to an arm, whether it was a revision to the shock, the shiv stack, multiple items, right, were done to really make sure this thing was going to be reliable and bulletproof. And which kind of leads us to the other bit. They are testing this thing to the max. These guys are not being gentle on it at all. From what they said on the presentation, there's about 7,700 on-road miles of testing and tuning, and there's about 7,300 of off-road miles. And these are hard off-road miles, if the way Max drove it on the trails is anything to tell us, man. He was not gentle with it.
No, they were definitely beating on it, trying to take it to its limit and really stress test it so that way the end user has the most refined thing they can get. So
another part that was cool was the live valve controller. So they kind of took the SDI approach here. So those that have SDI know what I'm talking about, right? Where you do a dedicated ECU to control the system. You add better sensors, like a better position sensors, because the truck sensor is like a cell phone sensor. And you add a much larger sensor, you get more accurate data. But they one-upped SDI and all the other systems and added precision sensors on the shocks, which that's key to really allow this thing to work correctly.
Yeah, they got the most data. I mean, from what we could tell, it was a refined system off of what we've seen before. They've had some different sensors they've engineered. They've added them in different places, different data, different feedback.
It also has OBD2 data, so it's going to get like speed, steering angle, throttle, braking. All that's going to be considered in the predictive algorithm of the truck. The 6-axis sensor is the IMU. It's 6-axis IMU. Now, from what we were told, it's connected somewhere under the driver's seat, because they're trying to get it as close as possible to the center of gravity of the truck, is what they said.
Was it the back seat or the driver's seat?
We didn't get a chance to see where it was, but they said close to the middle. They call it CG, center of gravity.
Yeah.
But what the coolest thing is the shock precision sensor. And this was kind of cool. At first I was like, okay, yeah, knowing the shock precision helps. But then Nobu, who's the designer there, the lead, brought up a good point. It's like they are using an internal bypass shock, and knowing where that shock piston is allows them to choke the fluid to take advantage of those internal bypasses. Because they're all passive. But with the live valve, you can restrict oil and make them a little bit more active. So by knowing the position, they can have much better control of the shock, which I thought was really, really cool. And I can't wait to see that be integrated on the Raptors as well.
They keep taking the live valve system and refining it, making it better and better.
They made a big deal about the touch point, that little controller thingy. Honest feedback, when you first saw that thing, did it look like plastic to you?
It does, but I mean, I feel like it had a good tactile feel to it once I had it in person.
What it has a good tactile feel, but it does look cheap, right?
I thought it was an acceptable, nicely presented. You know, if they're making something from scratch, I thought it did the job. You know, obviously different resources and things like that, different materials could, you know, make anything.
Well, here's the deal, right? So it is actually high-end materials. The little buttons are anodized aluminum. The casing is, what did I have it on here? Stainless steel case. And then the display, even though it's just LEDs, it is Gorilla Glass.
Yeah.
So it is high-end materials, but it didn't look high-end. Right?
I'd say, yeah, anything through the camera can, you know, be a little bit deceiving, but once you're there in person.
No, but even still, I'm talking about my experience in person. It didn't look high-end. I know it's high-end because nobody told us it's high-end.
Yeah.
But it didn't look high-end.
Yeah, I was okay with it. I thought it was a nice piece. But you know, I've seen OEs do several different things, and this is again an interpretation of how that could be integrated.
Now, another cool thing about the ECU and all that stuff, it does have Bluetooth access for the app, which is kind of cool. The app is really kind of like one of the cool features. I'm not a fan of having an dedicated app for the suspension up while you're going, but there's a couple features that I think are cool. One, obviously, is telemetry. It allows you, it shows you what the suspension is doing in all four corners. SDI, I think, does this better because they have a small display and you could see the amount of, restriction you're doing on each corner, so you can, see how the truck's doing and how it's compensating. Fox one-ups it with what they call real-time mapping, which I thought was really, really cool. And the guys highlighted it. This is great for pre-running.
Yes, absolutely. You get a lot of data having that in there.
Yeah, and what it does is it maps your trail as you're going along, but it also maps what your suspension is doing, so you know when you hit bottom on your suspension, which is really cool for anybody that pre-runs or builds maps and all that stuff. You know what your obstacles are because your suspension bottomed out on it.
Yeah.
So it makes it that much easier to map your routes, right? You don't have to stop and make sure you go mark it like most of us have to do on a pre-run, which I thought was really cool. And I think for race teams, it's going to be great.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm aware of some race teams currently using similar technology. So bringing that to the consumer level is going to be a big deal.
And I think the biggest feature here is over-the-air updates, which is continuous improvement. This thing can only get better as it ages. And I hope these guys are doing regular updates to the suspension to make it better as they, kind of evolve it, add more features to it, as they add applications for other vehicles. That's really cool because no other solution does that. Not even SDI has over-the-air updates, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it's something we've seen on the OE side with vehicles like Tesla and everything else like that. I mean, they're kind of the originators of over-the-air updates for vehicles and making them software dependent and improvable as time goes on. Yeah. So having that on something, aftermarket essentially, but on this truck, that's going to be something we'll probably see a lot more of.
And then I think they also said that you could capture diagnostics with it too. He didn't get too much into it because I don't think they have fully vetted that out. I think down the road, you will have the ability to say, hey, my truck's performing kind of funny. You can record it and send it up to them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's going to be, just being able to be made aware of an issue on something like the app, get a push notification or something like that. Not something we see a lot of in the aftermarket. So integrating that into something like your suspension, especially if you're off-roading a lot, it's going to be, really good to get ahead of it.
Those have been in the IT world. It's like collecting logs when you have an issue, right? It's really cool to be able to do that, kind of like a sniffer capture.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
The other piece that I want to highlight here that Nobu brought up is somebody asked is, can you do a custom tune on it? They didn't come out and say that you could. I think it's not available now, but they are considering opening that up down the road for other companies to release custom tunes for the live valve system, which that'd be cool.
Yeah,
right?
that'd be cool.
Kind of like an engine tune, transmission tune. Now you can do a suspension tune, which is pretty cool.
Swap a spring, different arms, maybe. They're like, okay, we have some data, we can incorporate that.
Yep, exactly.
It's just an idea, but yeah.
Let's go ahead and start talking about the suspension. There's a lot to digest on the suspension, right? Let's start off with the front because there's a lot going on there, right? Double A arms. They talked about double shear bolts on the top, but the one thing that stood out to me is they kept the stock Chevy bucket, right, which is a little bit shorter. And what they did is they added a cross member, kind of like a strut brace that goes over the engine to reinforce both of them so that they're tied together. But then they went a bit further and added reinforcement down to the upper control arm.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So that was kind of cool to see because, if you look at the stock Chevy design, it doesn't look, there's not much there.
Yeah, well, having that extra bracing on the outside of the A-arm connection point, and then it sandwiches with the top of like the strut tower.
And the shock.
Yeah, the shock, it'll kind of make it more of a cage design.
Now it's all bolt on, right? Like I think the piece on top and that goes down to the arms is one piece. The strut brace is 2 pieces, right? It connects to the top of each shock tower, and then there's 2 bolts in the middle to kind of hold it together.
Yeah.
I'm guessing they did that for serviceability, right?
It's a packaging thing to get it in there, make it go through.
Well, it's also a serviceable, right? You can
Yeah.
take that off later so that you can work on the engine. The spindle, the knuckle, whatever you call it. We're going to call it spindle. It's just easier for me to call it spindle. They did upgrade it. It looks OEM, but it's not. So the OEM is an aluminum block, and during their testing, they actually found that it was cracking, right? They found hairline cracks everywhere on that thing, and it wasn't up to the extra duty cycle they were adding to the truck. Even though what you're looking at there looks OEM, it's not. It is actually a custom design cast iron.
Yeah, they fully recasted it. They scanned it. They had some 3D scan models of it there that they 3D printed. They recasted it into a more durable unit, and then kind of weight reduced and reinforced from there.
Yeah, and they actually had a third-party company come in to do that piece, right? They actually had a company like design it out, figure out where they could take out some weight but add reinforcement, right? So that's why you see a little bit more holes and stuff like that in it, and that's what they've been testing the most, and it's keeping. Now, if I'm honest, I don't like it. I don't like it because of that little bend up top. We've seen too many vehicles and too many different designs bend that. We've seen it in the Raptor, right? I've seen it in Toyotas. I know I've seen it plenty of times in Toyotas. I'm not a fan of a cast piece there. And considering the price of this truck, that should have been billet.
Yeah, no, pros and cons to, you know, all the different trade-offs they did. I mean, like you were saying, in the Toyota world, that's where I'm primarily from in the off-road side of things. And, you know, we bend those knuckles on all the 4Runners and everything else all the time. Just doing some rock crawling and simple things, let alone with the, you know, these types of trucks too.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of that. I think it's cool that they reinforced it and they're doing proper tests. So I'm not saying that it's not going to last. I'm just saying that in my hands, I may bend or break that. I know, like Kevin. I know Kevin's probably watching this, Top Gun. I know he's bent one, and I know he's looking at that going, no, that's not going to go through his abuse, right? He's one of the guys that runs with me.
It's an area of, you know, that we could point to of potential concern. But from what we saw, it was holding up. It was doing well. You know, definitely a better replacement than the OE aluminum piece.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It is a big upgrade over the OE piece. It's much stronger, and they're definitely abusing it. So they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? I just wish, for the price point, I think is my only concern. Right? For the price point, that should have been either billet aluminum, which I know those are super expensive. It's probably like $5,000 a corner to do a billet
probably more with, you know, I don't know. It could have gotten out of control.
Either that or a fabricated piece, but I understand why they didn't do it, and we're going to go over that later.
Yeah, definitely the next best thing, I'd say.
Okay, the next piece is kind of what was kind of a surprise to both of us, the steering stabilizer. This has the stock electronic steering rack, and they added a stabilizer because, if I remember right, they said that it almost got too much chatter, right? There was too much feedback on the trails when they pushed it hard, and they wanted to kind of get the nice balance. They tried to actually like modify the steering's programming, but it kept breaking, right? They kept stopping to work. So being a shock company, they decided to add a stabilizer to kind of smooth that out a little bit and not punish the driver so much.
Yeah. I mean, it's a factory GM electronic steering rack that comes in the Silverados, and they wanted to complement it and improve it. I think that was a good solution to add extra dampening force, especially when you have big 37s or other things hitting the whoops all the time.
And the way they said it is they wanted to tighten it up off-road, but also slow it down to reduce the extra feedback you get off-road. Right, so tighten it up, but slow it down. Now, if I'm honest, because we did drive this thing, and we're going to go a little bit deeper dive on the driving side here in a bit, to me, the steering was numb, extremely numb.
Yeah, almost surprisingly so. I mean, I've driven several Raptors and other things off-road over time, and I was surprised, compared to a hydraulic system, how much feedback I wasn't getting. But I would feel the truck maybe, you know, in the sand especially, you know, you're catching side to side, you're doing that. So having, you know, a little bit more to keep it straight would have been nice. But again, these are test mules. They've been beat up pretty hard. So I'm trying to just attribute what I can to different things.
Yeah, but it was, and, you know, and numbness could be a good thing. It could also be a bad thing, right? I think off-road, you do want a little bit more of a number steering wheel so that you're not getting beat up the whole time. But I think there wasn't enough feedback coming back, right? And I think that was one of the concerns that I had, and we'll go over it a little bit more when we start talking about the driving, but it was a little bit numb. All right, now the next piece that I think is probably one of the most controversial decisions they made, I think a lot of you guys are going to be surprised by it, right? And it's that everything is bolt-on.
Yeah.
Everything. Everything is bolt-on. Nothing is welded.
I was surprised to see even the reinforcements and things like that were bolt-on. You know, as we've touched on, we get why that was, but definitely a surprise with the way the truck's been marketed thus far.
A couple things to highlight here. There's no extra reinforcement on the lower control arm mounts. That is like key for an off-road truck. There is none because that was one of the mandates. Everything had to be bolt-on. They did add caster camber locks, which is a big plus. I don't know why Ford still doesn't include caster camber locks stock with all the Raptors or F-150s in general, period. It should be stock, and it's not. The benefit there is that it can align it anywhere, right? Because as soon as you do a slot delete or something like that, you need specialized shops that know how to take apart the suspension, do the adjustment up top to do the alignment. The way they did this, you don't need that. You can take this to any shop. Again, worldwide delivery, worldwide support was a key factor in this truck, and that's why everything's bolt-on, and that's why there's no welded reinforcement. They did add reinforcement though, like the cross member over the front.
Yes.
And then there's two cross members in the back. One for the panhard bar, and then I know we didn't notice it on site, but I was reviewing the video. There's another reinforcement bar over the bump stops.
Yes.
Those are the only three that I found. 3 cross member reinforcements. There's no additional reinforcements down the middle, but they did make sure that some of the plates were larger. Like the back end, the shock and bump stop plate is very, very wide, bolts onto multiple pieces, and really reinforces the back of the frame substantially, even though it is bolt-on. But the main reason why everything is bolt-on, well, there's 2 reasons. One is for warranty. They wanted to keep the GM warranty intact. They wanted the dealers to be able to support it. But second, they wanted to be able to ship this globally, and if that frame was cut up in any way, it would have to go through different certification, and it wouldn't be able to ship. I think the one area they called out is if the frame is chopped in any way, they can't ship it to Abu Dhabi, and that's a big...
Yeah, they had to go through several different certifications to make it certified in various different ways. I know we have some specifics probably we can cover, but that was, like you said, so they had that kind of ability to put it into different markets and make sure it was going to meet the standards that those jurisdictions have.
I know it's something that you guys don't like, but it is fully bolt-on. Everything is bolt-on on this truck, and it retains the stock frames international certification standards that GM spent years getting. Yeah. So this truck can go anywhere where a Silverado can go, this thing can go. Apparently, like if you take a Raptor, you chop it up, add plating and all that stuff, you can't ship it to certain countries, right? It won't pass their international shipping certifications, and that was something that they did not want to restrict. They wanted to make sure that European folks, Middle East folks, all those folks that really enjoy these kind of trucks to be able to get them. Let's talk about the shocks. So the shocks was kind of interesting. So 3.2 live valves. They're a little bit bigger. To me, they look like kind of the Fox Factory Race Series, the FRS versions of the stock Raptor shocks. Because the Raptor shocks are 3.1, 3.2, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And these were that, but with the larger lines, the high flow lines, the larger reservoir. They did have fin reservoirs for better cooling. But the way they did this too is a little bit different, right? The stroke is a little bit different. It's 8.34 inch stroke up front that results in 14.5 inches of travel. The stock stroke, they brought this up, the stock stroke on an RST is 3 3/4 inches.
Yeah.
3.75. So going from 3.75 to 8.3 is huge. They're also using dual live valves, but it's different live valves. Those that have the R know what I'm talking about. If you have the R, it's the same live valve. It's the really skinny one with the solenoid on top of it, and you have 2 of those per shock. They're using a completely different style for the rebound control on these shocks, and I think they did it for speed, right, and for the application. It's supposed to be a little bit better.
Yeah, no, it was a completely, I guess I'll call it revised system. I don't have a ton of experience with what they're doing on the R and some of the other trucks, but I know the components that they were using, some of their engineers and such were saying that, this is a new system, new components, new approach that they're using for that system. Yielded good results.
There is also a little bit extra preload in the front, right? They're using about half the threads on there too, it looked like. They were using quite a bit. And then they have factory style liners up front, kind of like those felt type liners up front.
The fender liners that they made? Yeah.
I did rip a set off.
Yeah.
During my test drive.
What'd you do?
And like I said, though, they have an OE approach to this truck. They had fender liners front and rear with the new carbon wide body. They did a really good job putting it on there. I think at the absolute limit, like Helio tends to find, or even some of their R&D techs, they said they're still getting them dialed in, but it was really nice to even have that, keep the debris in check.
To their defense, these aren't the production liners, right? These are kind of like the cut up ones that they've modified a million times to try to get in there and get all the right angles, and it was zip tied in there. The production liners are good. From what they told us, they're going to be much tighter into the body. Now, because the liner was ripped out, we also got to see that they did do the pinch welds. They did modify the body and cut and bend all the pinch welds to clear the three sides.
I mean, from what we could tell, you know, I don't want to like speak in absolutes on that, but it looked like there was maybe some modifications, at least on these test mules. You know, we'll see what the final production models, if we get our hands on them, would have in there.
Let's talk about the rear suspension now.
Yeah.
So the rear suspension was pretty cool. Trailing arms, 775 billet A-arms for the lowers. Unfortunately, the tops are steel uppers, which I thought was...
It's like a tubular steel kind of, yeah.
Yeah, considering the price point, that should have been billet all the way around. All four arms should have been billet. I don't know why they went steel. Maybe just for weight and for size and all that stuff for fitment, but yeah.
I mean, one of the things that they really considered with essentially an aftermarket arm, it's Baja Kits, Brenthal Industries, but one of the things they really took a lot of time and effort into is the noise, the creaking, the chattering, things we're used to on off-road vehicles in the aftermarket. I mean, on this truck, maybe a different type of urethane or a different type of eyelet that they were using helped with that noise or that NVH that they were trying to avoid on the back end. That might be a reason why, but just a theory.
Yeah, maybe because they're not in view, but it does kind of suck that you have this really beautiful lower
Absolutely, yeah.
billet arm. And I mean, it is gorgeous. It is very well designed. It's got a built-in skid plate. It's got a rubber skid plate on there as well that's sacrificial. They even added a rubber skid plate, kind of like a plastic rubber skid plate for the shock shaft in the back, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Why then is the inner link rods and the panhard arm, why are they steel? They should have been billet. I mean, they should have just followed that same design for the rest of the truck. It was because that arm was gorgeous. That arm was gorgeous.
I agree with that. I think it's one of those wish list items where, based on how cool the truck was as a whole, you know, it's one of those things that would definitely complement it to see throughout.
Yep. When you consider the price, you would expect billet. And that's another reason why there's problems with the price. We'll talk about it later. I know you guys are itching. I know some of you guys are already typing.
They're already in the comments.
So we kind of talked a little bit on the bolt-on. Everything is bolt-on. Nothing is cut. Nothing on the frame is cut. Everything is integrated to stock holes in some way or another. They even tried not to drill the frame. And even like the way they integrated the leaf pack, some of it uses the stock leaf pack pivots as well, right? So that they don't go everything the way. So I think the rear ones are left alone, but the front pivots are used for the inner links.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. And again, this was done for serviceability purposes so that any dealer could replace a component if it gets damaged. And this was like one of the big key things that they highlighted is serviceability. This has to be serviceable at any dealer. They want to try to avoid having to send this back to the factory at Fox to get repaired. And if it was weld on, very few dealers can do weld-on repairs.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one drawback to bolt-on is their strategy for bolting things on. And I think this was kind of one of the drawbacks to me. Everything was surface bolted, meaning it was only mounted to the surface of the frame. So like the rear pivots, a lot of the bolt-on parts was in the back. The strategy they took is everything had bolts up on the face and on the bottom, which is a good strategy to have, right, to kind of locate everything.
Yeah.
But nothing bolts through the frame, which to me is kind of, to the way I drive, it's a concern.
Yeah, potential concern down the line, you know, if there's a hard impact or, you know, something that shears a little bit or something like that comes loose, whatever, having it go through one face or the other versus through the whole thing, potentially.
The GM frame is not as wide as a Ford frame. It's similar, kind of like, you know, fully box frame nowadays, but it's not the same as a Ford frame. It's actually narrower. So I'm sure there's probably some reasons why they couldn't do that all the way through, or maybe it's just a matter of cost or simple of install. I don't know why they chose to go that route. My concern is even when I recommend stuff to you guys, right? I never recommend a surface mounted bump stop because those can peel away, right? You hit something hard enough, you can peel everything away. And I always recommend a clamshell setup that goes all the way around the whole frame to really add strength and avoid, you know, you twisting or peeling off on the frame. One thing we do have to talk about here about everything being bolted is the rear linked arm when we got there.
Yeah.
When we were looking through that setup, right, we were kind of looking to see how everything's mounted, right? You even found all the standoff plates they used to kind of put all the bolts and all that stuff. And we noticed that there was 3 bolts missing from the linked arm on the rear suspension on the passenger side. And at first I was like, oh, maybe they're just missing there because it's welded, right? Yeah. I thought it was initially welded. And we went to the other side and realized, no, there's supposed to be bolts there. And then like, well, maybe.
Yeah.
Because these are prototypes, right? Maybe they were swapping components. Because one thing I did notice, They did not want any potential owners seeing them working on the truck. Like they didn't even want to see them putting the tires back on the truck for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, when we came in, they were on the lifts. They kind of had it up there on display for us. I mean, they did explain to us, you know, this is a test mule. This is something that, you know, we regularly, you know, are making alterations to, changing, stuff like that. So it could have been, you know, we caught them in between, you know, some revisions or some adjustments.
That's kind of what we both thought, right? Like, okay, maybe they were just swapping that out. And we all got there early. Like, we got there early and all the other guys were there already. So everybody got there early. So my thought was we caught them and they had a policy of nobody works on the truck while the customers are around. Because even when we went to the ride-alongs, they would not work on the truck until everybody packed in the vehicles and we took off. And they actually took us to a bridge so that we can like BS a little bit, get some shots of the truck under the bridge, just so that they can finish swapping that lower arm piece and get it back together and even put the tires back on. They wouldn't do that in front of us, even while we were eating.
Yeah, and you know, I come from a background where I've worked in the aftermarket a little bit, and you know, you want to kind of keep, you know, the project as close to the chest as, you know, it's your baby, you've been working on it a long time, and there's, you know, a lot of, I guess, diligence and effort that goes into that. So having kind of an audience is not preferred, but I know they were beating on the trucks the day before, and they've been, you know, kind of keeping them up to par as we went along. So
that's the reason why I think they were empty, guys. So not a big deal. We made sure that they were replaced before we left. They're like, oh yeah, to me it was obvious that they just didn't want to have anybody see them working on the truck. Another thing that was kind of weird about the frame that I've never seen before, but apparently it's normal for GM frames. The GM frame was very dusty. It collected a lot of dust, so much so that it made it really easy to figure out what's aftermarket and what's GM. And the GM frame has this weird waxy, oily coating on it.
Yeah, they dip the frame at the factory. It helps with corrosion, gets in there, but that in turn, when we go off-roading, dust, things like that.
And that was also one of the reasons why they made everything bolt-on, because in order to weld on that thing, you have to strip that off. Otherwise, you're going to catch the whole thing on fire.
Yeah, that was another con to them welding things to it. It was just, you know.
They wanted to maintain the rust proofing.
Exactly.
Oh, another thing that's worth highlighting here, because of that large plate setup and how they mounted the shocks, you had a fully usable bed. It wasn't cut up or anything.
Yeah.
You could have a fully open bed if you wanted to. You didn't have to have a bed cage back there.
And the bed cage that they did have, I mean, we'll touch on it, but that was part of the reinforcement, sandwiching kind of through to the frame into the bed rack, right? That's my understanding.
The way they explain it to us is the bed on GM trucks is actually mounted from underneath. Mm-hmm. So you can't just put a bed on there and sandwich it between the bed and just expect the bed to hold the weight. That's not going to work off-road. It might work with regular stuff, but it's not going to work off-road. You have to have a way to mount that to the frame. So what they did is they added these extra plates. So in the front, the mounting hole is integrated to the shock tower setup. And then in the back, they actually added an extra plate that connects the bed to the frame. Mm-hmm. So that you can fully put it on there and it's mounted to the frame, not directly to the bed. So I think that was pretty cool. And then let's see, what else do they have on there? And also it makes it easy to remove the bed rack too.
Yeah.
So the way they explained it to us, there's a couple different versions of the bed rack. You can do single tire, dual tire, or you can go without. It's up to you.
Yeah.
The bed rack itself is very flexible so that you guys can add your rotor packs, you can add your gas cans, whatever you want to add, it has the ability to do it. And if you needed to take it out, it's just 4 bolts. You just take out the bolts from the top. You don't have to do anything from the bottom, and it comes out. So I think that was pretty cool. That was well thought out design for the bed rack.
Yeah, there's, you know, in terms of delivery, one of the things that they did highlight is you could customize the light setup, you could customize the bed rack. Those were 2 areas that there was some movement in terms of making it to your setup.
They know that they're not going to be able to meet every use case, but they also know the aftermarket can, so they left it flexible so that you guys can customize it however you want after you get it from them. Going back to the actual suspension though, the shocks in the back, 15.5 inches of travel with an 11.4 inch stroke from the back. Now they made a big deal about the springs for the rear shocks, right? The rear springs are a progressive spring setup. So it's dual rates built into one spring, which is pretty hard to get nowadays. But the problem I had with it, it had way too much preload. Like it was maybe like 1/2 inch to 1 inch before the bottom threads on that back end. It had a ton of preload back there. I don't know why they did that. I feel like they could have done it with a longer spring, you know?
Yeah, maybe it was just a packaging constraint is my guess. I know they didn't want to do a helper spring setup. They like that variable rate spring. But having everything below the bed too, I think was probably some influence on it.
It could have been, but there was room for the spring there. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand why there's so much preload on there. And when you add that much preload, you're negating part of the stroke of that spring, right? Like the spring could bind itself too. It can limit up travel. because there was a substantial amount there. Now, we did ask them, hey, and multiple people asked this too. It's like, why don't you guys use the dual rate springs with the helper? And the reason they said no is because it does move and it does scratch up the shock body, and they didn't want to have that because, again, shipping worldwide, they want to be good in any location, and the last thing you want is rust on your shocks.
Yeah, I mean, that was something they did emphasize heavily. You know, they're an aftermarket company, but they wanted to take the OE refined approach to everything they did to the truck. So
they did actually test quite a few different ones, and they actually broke us in. They showed it to us there on the table. It was
I'll
broken.
probably put a picture shot of that in.
Yeah, so they took a long time to get to that spring. I don't understand why there's so much preload. It's too much. In my opinion, there's way too much preload. I think the front's a little bit more, the front still has a little much, but the rear has a lot of preload on there, which I wasn't too big of a fan on. What else to talk about? Oh, the Dana 60. So the Dana 60 axle, full width, right? So it's extra width from the stock one. Very similar to the Ford 93/4. I think if you had them side by side, just from the view from the back, they look almost identical.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be your area of expertise. I'm not sure how it compares to the Ford unit, but
the front end is different. The front end obviously is different where the pumpkin goes. It's a little bit different.
yeah.
But it almost looked identical. And Dana makes both of them. The 93/4, Dana makes it on the Ford Raptor.
That's what I was going to ask you. I think they're similar in manufacturing.
And it's very much a Dana 60 kind of OE style, Raptor OE style rear axle, which is pretty cool. The gearing is different though. They're using 3.75 gears. Ford uses 410s. And usually those that upgrade to, 37s or higher, they tend to go to like 455s or 488s. So they chose 373. It felt good driving it, so it's working.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's about all you could say about the axle until you really,
Yeah, it worked. So no complaints there, honestly. It felt very
familiar.
familiar.
I'm glad they upgraded it.
This area was a skid plates. Now, this is an area where I felt this build is lacking. The only skid plate that I could find is the one that the integrated to the front bumper. There is no mid skid plate protecting like the back of the engine and the transmission. There is skid plates on the rear trailing arms. There's obviously better protection on the shocks and stuff like that, but skid plates, this thing is very, very much lacking, and it does leave that mid-engine section, transmission section, vulnerable. I don't even think there was a skid plate on the transfer case.
I don't recall. Yeah, the transmission and transfer case being, they're in the middle of the truck, but they're high up from the frame, but still some protection, especially like we keep saying, and the price point would be nice.
But let's see. Let me look through the back. See, they had there's a little thin skid plate on the gas tank. Oh, wait a minute. There's not much of a skid plate on the gas tank either. It's more like wrapping, which that's going to be a concern too.
I thought I saw a thin metal one, but
but it's like really thin. Even the Raptor has kind of like more like that plastic one, that composite one that it uses. It's even more, I don't know, it offers more protection than what I'm seeing here. But look at that. Yeah, there's not even anything for the transfer case.
Yeah, the transfer case.
And this is the gas tank right here. There's nothing on the gas tank. There's stuff protection on the sides, but there's nothing on the gas tank.
On the bottom side, yeah, there's not anything. They do have some around it. And
maybe
is that on the front
shields
too? Is that only on the front, or does it go all the way? Hard to see, but yeah, it looks like it might just be front.
Yeah, there's like front
deflection.
skid plates.
Yeah, front
right?
deflection.
And there's like kind of like it's more heat shield than skid plate though.
Yeah, heat management.
Yeah, which that kind of sucks. This is gonna need the skid plate on that gas tank, and it's gonna need a mid skid plate with the way they're abusing it. So that is kind of a drawback, right? I wish there was more skid plates. Frame reinforcement, there's not much of it. Unfortunately, there's not much up front. There's a strut brace, right? That's part of the frame, kind of reduces the flex. There's the two in the back, one that goes over the panhard bar. Well, it goes kind of like in the middle of the panhard bar, right?
Yeah.
And then there's one over the bump stop, which is right next to it. That's the only thing that I could see. I didn't see anything else aside from the stock ones.
Yeah, the frame was pretty much stock minus those reinforcements for the rear suspension, and then the front suspension.
Now, they made a big deal to talk about that they added frame reinforcement because there was a lot of flex in the stock frame of the Silverado.
Yeah.
But I wish there was more. I almost wish that there was more on here, but I understand why they didn't do more, right? Again, keeping that stock frames rating, worldwide rating, so they could ship it globally was very important. So they were limited by that. Another area that I think was kind of meh was the exhaust. For the price point, you would expect true dual exhaust all the way to the back. This was not. In fact, the front exhaust is all stock, and it had that really silly flattened section up front.
There was some packaging constraints on the front, from each header to the Y pipe that they come together on. I mean, it was more of an oval shaped crossover from the driver's side to the passenger side that we noticed, but that's a product of GM. You know, this is more of a catback system, I would describe it as, than a true full-through exhaust.
And it's a catback system with resonator, right? And it's not a true dual exhaust. It does kind of have like that OE style kind of squared off, because Chevy loves squares, exhaust in the back. But yeah, I think for the price point, they should have had 2 dual exhausts.
Yeah, I mean, it was a boreless system that they made specifically for the Fox Factory Edition Silverados. I'd definitely take it over the stock GM HDMI port-looking system that the RSTs usually come with, but a welcome improvement. It did bring some sound to the table.
Oh, it sounded great. It sounded excellent. So sound was not a concern. Sound was definitely not a concern. It sounded great.
Yeah.
And it wasn't overbearing, too. Right, because you could easily get into one of these exhausts that just drones. It wasn't droning. It was good.
No, that was great.
But for the price,
I think again it was just a trade-off of emissions and modifying those components for the different markets the truck's intended for.
Next area is one of the biggest benefits, and that's warranty. Goodyear 36 bumper to bumper, 5-year 60 for the powertrain, truck, engine, frame, electronics. All that stuff is all supported by GM. Anything aftermarket like the supercharger, the suspension, the fenders, the rear axle, all those extra components that they add are supported by Fox. But we got the impression that this is all dealer supportable, right? So like Fox is the supplier of all the parts and the prover and all that stuff, but it can be done all at the dealer. Doesn't matter where you go, as long as you have a GM dealer, they can repair it. That's a big plus on a truck like this, right? Especially something that's aftermarket. A drawback to me was the steps. It had the amp deployable steps. I know a lot of guys like that look, that clean look, and it's really nice to have that step come out, especially when you're shorter and you have a wife that wants to be comfortable getting in, they don't want to climb up. The step is really great. But for the type of off-roading we do, that sucks because it offers no protection to the side of the truck and then no protection to those rear fenders, and those rear fenders were textured. They were definitely textured from the damage in the desert. That's going to happen anyways, but like the Raptors come with those nice steps, and a lot of us Raptor guys, we keep those steps because that's the only thing protecting the sides of the truck and the rear fenders.
Yeah, it kind of acts as like an impromptu shield to kind of keep everything from sandblasting it.
And almost everyone I go on, there's always a dong. I always get a dong as it blocks a giant rock from hitting the side of the truck. So I love that OE Raptor style steps. I kind of was hoping for some protection there, but they went with the amp steps. Now, I'm sure that's something you could change down the road. I know that they make rock sliders type steps that stick out for Silverado, so that's something you can change later.
Yeah, absolutely a preferential item there.
We didn't talk too much to them about the interior, and most of us were more interested in the suspension, but they do upgrade the interior, right? There's custom leather stitching all through the interior. I think they did kind of like a custom goose type of, or like alligator or something. I don't even know what it was. It looked cool.
Yeah, the fabric that they were using, completely different cover for the seats essentially to kind of match that ongoing, Fox Factory orange accent.
The only other customization we noticed inside was the controller, right? It wasn't just the controller up top, it was also that panel, and it looked like it was part of the dash. It was actually pretty well integrated.
I agree.
But that's it as far as the interior. The other piece that I really liked about the truck was the styling. It looked good. The fenders look good. The ports on the fenders look really good.
This generation of Silverado has needed a little bit something extra for a long time, and I think these guys nailed it. I think the styling is fantastic. I think the wide body with the carbon, so they did some extra venting on the front fenders. It looks great. I think it was a really good piece.
Can't complain about the styling, especially, GM's trucks have been ugly for a long time. The current generation is finally starting to look better, especially from the interior. You don't have that Cyclops freaking entertainment center anymore.
Yeah.
So interior and exterior, it's a whole lot more pleasing. I think the only complaint I have is why did they have to raise the hood? They raised the hood a little bit, which sucks for us short people. Makes it harder for me to see the trail, and it wasn't necessary. It really wasn't. It doesn't add anything to the styling, so that's the only thing I didn't like. But aside from that, the truck looked good. For a Chevy, it looked really good.
And that's something I didn't remember asking them about. Is that the factory RST hood with that vent in the middle? Okay, so that is a factory RST hood.
But they did raise it. Oh, no. The hood's aftermarket. The hood's carbon fiber.
That is part of the carbon package then.
Yeah, it's part of the carbon fiber. So you get the fenders front and back, even the fuel door, they made a big point. The fuel door is carbon fiber, and then the hood is carbon fiber.
Yeah, no, they did a really good job with like the rear bed, for example. You could see the exposed carbon through the clear coat
It looked
everything
great.
else like that. Yeah, and like they said, the gas door and all that stuff. having that styling bulge to the front hood, it you know, probably over the factory unit was worth the aesthetic change.
But it's the whole thing that they raised,
Yeah,
right? And
it
it
is
just kind of
bulged out.
blocks you. You kind of like see this extra little line. You're like, what is that?
Yeah, I don't know if it was
I'm short, so I noticed that stuff. I don't like bulges on the hood.
Yeah. And I don't know if you wanted to comment on some of the pre-production or maybe some of the other things we've seen from these R&D trucks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So on the styling, right? Like a lot of the badging and stuff we saw on there, that's not full production, right? That's just to kind of get, that was like the current version, right? It's not the production version.
Yeah, some of the things that the guys commented on, you know, on the fenders, maybe the fit and finish there. You know, the badging is 3D printed. It's not the final units that they're going to use in production. These, you know, like we keep saying, these were test mules. These were vehicles they were using in the R&D process. So we would see that, you know, oh, this panel maybe didn't go back as correctly because it was being taken on and off so often. They were tearing, you know, the interior apart, things like that. So we were seeing some issues there, maybe very minor stuff, but you know, in my experience with the aftermarket and some R&D vehicles, things going back together or not completely. I mean, you're pressed for time, you want to get the data, and you don't always slap it back together as appropriately as possible to get it, you know, exactly how it came apart.
Not only that, the test mule doesn't need to test every single version of the logo, right? Once they know that the part fixed, it's just a matter of changing the outside. And that's some of the things that we saw there, right? Like the supercharger logo is probably going to be different than production. The number plates are going to be different in production. They just needed to make sure that everything they built on was there, and that's what's on the truck, but the final version is going to be a little different. So I think that's it as far as the deep dive of this thing, right? I think next we should talk about the ride-along. So one of the coolest things of this event was it was applying ride-along to get everybody to experience the truck. And then depending on the group side, we would also get to drive it. I was really, really looking forward to driving this thing because you almost never get to drive these. Never.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to highlight from the ride-along is they were not gentle with this truck. They pushed it hard. They were doing mid-travel stuff with what is essentially a stock factory truck, right? It was kind of stock factory style. The guy was not gentle at all. So that was pretty impressive. I think the one big takeaway from me from the ride-alongs, and I know a lot of you guys aren't going to believe this, but the GM fit and finish is not up to Ford standards.
Yeah, and if I had to comment on that, I mean, this isn't a result of anything on the Fox Factory Edition specifically, but maybe just the Silverado as a whole. I mean, in my mind, I mean, obviously haven't had sit-downs with these manufacturers, but in my mind, the Raptor's 3 generations deep of NVH refinement, things like that, to maybe the unibody side of the cab, and then the frame and how they interact together. Whereas the Silverado, I mean, they're kind of delving into it with different, you know, editions of that truck, but
they have Trail Bosses.
Well, they have the Trail Boss. They're doing the what's the AEV Bison edition of the truck now, with you know, a little bit of the ZR2 feel to it.
But my first impression was it was loud in there, and it wasn't the suspension. The suspension was quiet. The suspension was very quiet. The biggest noise in the cab was the door rattle.
Yeah, so we had 4 people to a truck for these ride-alongs, and if you were in the back seat, been in a lot of different Raptors and things like that, I mean, you could definitely tell when there's that flex in the frame, the movement of the door against the weather seals, the latches, things like that. There was a noticeable difference, and that's just a product of, you know, this current generation of Silverado. But
have you had a chance to listen to it though? I actually captured it. I had my cell phone out while I was sitting in the back. Oh my God, was it loud in the back. I'm gonna play a quick little clip right here so you guys can hear it. But you're hearing a lot, and I mean a lot of rattle from those rear doors, but you're also seeing a lot of movement from the dash. That was another piece that was kind of surprising. Even on the Raptors, we get some movement, but we don't get anywhere near the noise that we were getting from this.
So the quick and dirty, this is kind of our fast loop if you're familiar with our racing. This is like the same section. Lots of interchanging lines. Good open type of energy.
Did you hear that? That's the doors. And that's the seats even making a little bit of noise, but it's mostly the doors.
Okay. Keep your eyes out for them. Some more eyes on it. So, we're doing 70 right now. We're in the desert.
Now, that's the other thing. We were cruising at 70, and it was like nothing to this thing. It wasn't perfectly smooth, but it was nice.
So you kind of feel like the top right here.
Yeah, the closer to that knocking sound that you're hearing in the video, that's the doors one way or another at the latches, at the whether this is contacting body or kind of rattling. Something I definitely noticed. I started out on my ride along in the back seat of one of the trucks, and that was pretty quickly apparent on that.
This is a GM issue. It's not their issue, right? You said it. It's not their issue, but it was kind of surprising because definitely the build quality is not up to Ford standards. And we hit this one section where it was uneven and the truck was going side to side and it got real bad. So it happens after this little jump. We hit right here. And then it got really bad. I'm going to show you guys a clip what that looks like on the outside, but that was awful. It felt awful on the inside. I was not expecting that from a live valve truck, right? Because live valve trucks can predict, and then when they start seeing that, they can compensate for the body roll. And this was violent. This was quite violent. I don't know if you felt it on your run, but I noticed this on my run. I was like, a live valve truck should not be this violent, this side to side unstable.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the terrain, it's hard to see in some of these videos. You know, it's the usual desert kind of washboard or the quick up and down, low peaked whoops, if you will. I don't know if that was the right way to articulate it, but it was a rough enough thing, especially with some speed that the suspension was putting in that work. But like you said, maybe it was anything from the calibration or the way it was anticipating. I don't know if it was the sensor location, things like that. It did have some.
That's kind of what I think it is. Like, we didn't see where the sensor was in the middle, but I have a feeling the sensor location is not optimized. And then also, I don't think their current algorithm is optimizing for a level ride yet. Because anything we hit head on, it did a really good job with it. But as soon as it started getting a little uneasy, it got really bad. And the slow-mo footage shows it, right? So I'm going to show you guys a few clips here, one from afar and then two close up. And it's violent. And you're definitely seeing the truck not compensating correctly. The high-speed shutter.
Yeah, I know. Who's that guy?
And I did slow it down so you guys can kind of get a better look. And you could see the suspension is working throughout the whole thing, right? It's pretty cool to see it work and see it chew up the desert. Anything head on, it hits it really well. Little to no bucking, which I thought was key. Head on though, here's where you start seeing that the strategy is not quite there side to side. Doesn't look too bad in the regular speed, but as soon as you slow it down, you start to see it. So let's just slow it down. And look at that body roll.
Yeah, and my question, I mean, you know, this is an afterthought analysis of our day with the team over there at Fox. I'd be curious to see what the testing conditions were, if they're testing in a truck with 4 adults in it, if they're doing that, you know, on a regular basis, or if it's an empty truck with just a driver or an engineer in it. But you know, some of those things could attribute to some of that body movement maybe that they haven't fine-tuned just yet.
I think it's more of a complaint for me because I was surprised. I've seen what a SDI folks do with a better sensor and a really good algorithm, right? I've been impressed by the SDI teams really tapping into the performance of the live valves. This thing with dual live valve setup, faster valves, OE setup, I expected it to be super flat going through sections like that. The good thing is here is over-the-air updates. This is something they can fix. We've highlighted it to them. I hope to have a follow-up video with them so we could talk about that piece. And hopefully by the time we talk to them, they've addressed it already.
Yeah.
Because this is live valve, this is software. They can fix that with software. Now, I did talk to one of them, and he did say that part of it has to do with the frame flex. There's a whole lot more frame flex on this truck that's just unavoidable. You can't avoid it. So that could be the reason why.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed to see that. I was expecting a much smoother ride from this truck.
Yeah, I'd say, one of the lenses I keep viewing this truck through is that, these are essentially their test mules. This is something that's been beat on. We have a few other comments we'll make that we've noticed maybe between some of the aspects of the truck that it's clear that these have been put through the ringer above and beyond what they might normally see and what they might normally account for. But yeah, we'll get into that.
But I think the key here is the whoops we were hitting were huge.
They were big.
And it had no problem handling them. It wasn't perfect, but it handled them. For an OE style truck, that was impressive. The side to side roll was it shook to the sides pretty violently. I know they can fix that. I know they can fix that, and I'm hoping the production truck has that fixed to get it a little bit smoother. And it prioritizes a level truck. We've seen that with the TRX. TRX prioritizes level truck, and it's impressive to see it before you hit the limits of the TRX, right? It's impressive to see it going down the trail and stay more level. I think that's what this truck needs, a little bit of tweak on the algorithm to get that. Overall, I think it looked pretty good. I mean, considering what this truck is, all bolt-on, linked setup, factory style, Raptor R style competitor, it was pretty impressive, right, for what it is.
Yeah, if you're comparing it to what they are benchmarking and what they started with, the team's done a phenomenal job, I think, making this a worthy comparable to the other vehicles.
Yeah, and I would say in some ways I would put this above the TRX in performance off-road.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of the setup, because of the larger shocks, and just the components involved, I would say this is closer to a Raptor R than a TRX is.
Yeah.
Right, it's impressive what they did here, guys, and the passion of this team showed in those drives, right? And they pushed it. They did not hold back. We also got a chance to drive it. Now, we don't have much footage of us driving the trucks because you had to quickly get into the truck to get a drive. Sometimes they kind of kicked you out of the truck so you can get somebody else in there. So it wasn't as well organized as I would like, and we didn't, like you and I didn't get a chance to both ride together so we could film it, right? Which was unfortunate. But we did get some impressions in it. So first of all, let me kind of give you guys an overview of the trail we were on. It was a sandy trail, pretty deep sand, the typical sand that's on the trail that kind of just drives the truck for you. You try to steer one way, but wherever the sand takes you, that's kind of where you're going. That's where the sand ruts are, that's where you're going. And it also had some pretty big whoops on there, so it wasn't gentle. It was a proper abuse. Before we took off, I asked, I think it's Max, right? I asked Max, any restrictions? He said, no, if you're pushing it too hard, we will tell you.
What'd you do? We blew both of them out before we did.
Really?
Yeah.
So, in my defense, he did tell me I had to pull it back.
Yeah. And I would say, like Helio touched on, this was a group setting. We want everyone to get their time in the seat. I mean, I'd say solid, 10, 15 minutes of hard driving we got with the trucks there and back. We did a nice loop out in the desert. Definitely got a feel for the truck. I'd say, we'd love to see it when it's, fully at the refined production level. Yeah.
Because this has seen a lot of abuse. And during the test drive, I definitely bottomed it out. But I will say that the engine was amazing. Yeah. During the test drive, oh my God, it was just as soon as you hit the gas, it was on the power right away. There was no lag, there was no downshifting. You couldn't even feel the shifts. It was so smooth. It was just instant power anytime you got on it. The only complaint I would say is that the driving experience did feel numb. Mm-hmm. The steering especially felt numb. Now, no matter where I pointed it, it went there. So I did like that. And my driving style, I'm used to the electronic steering racks from the Gen 2s. Those are pretty numb too. But the Gen 2s gave you feedback, sometimes to a worst case scenario like I found. This one, I didn't feel too much feedback to the steering wheel, but if I pointed it somewhere, it went there. If I pointed it back, it went there. And I kept my hands pretty loose, constantly moving. And I felt like I had pretty good control of the truck, but it felt wobbly. Right? Did you have a similar experience?
When I drove the truck, like I said, it was on sand. It was on a whoop section, trying to carry some speed. I felt like it was too numb for my liking. I've driven, Gen 3 Raptor, Gen 2 Raptor. Drove your truck actually while we were out there just to have kind of a back-to-back feel. The different electronic steerings, the different hydraulic steering. It's completely different from those two, almost to, outside of what I would prefer.
Now-
Even with that dampening system, even with those other things, I would have preferred a little bit more steering, feedback, and stability is how I would describe it.
And I would say, like, I was a little confused when I was done because of how disconnected I felt from the diving experience. When I started reviewing the footage, I think we found out why. There's kind of a little quirk going on here. We noticed it in the ride-alongs when we had a chance to look at it from the outside. Let me just play the clips for you and you can kind of get an idea, right? This is the full speed clip. It looks fairly normal. It looks a little jittery, but not too bad. But when you start slowing it down is when you really start seeing something's off. Right, and you kind of see it coming down. You start seeing it here. If you pay attention to the driver's side tire, but then also look at the steering wheel input. There's quite a bit of wobble there, and this clip right here kind of shows it even more. This one's super slow down. So you can see the front end is basically doing this. And it almost looks like this is doing more than that one, right? Like, if you look at it, that little bit of wobble, that tire is moving a whole lot more than this one is. And none of that is reflected in the steering wheel. Right?
Yeah. And that's something I noticed in my driving experience is there was I'll call it a disconnect or a hesitation to keep the vehicle as straight as I wanted, especially on a complex surface like sand. And seeing the footage of maybe that driver's side having some toe in and out as it hits the whoops, as it goes down the terrain, might have attributed to what I was feeling. And these are test wheels. They're beat to, all living, so.
I don't know what's going on here. It could be bad ball joints, right? Because this truck hadn't gone through a lot of reviews. It could be hubs that are causing the issue. But there's a big disconnect from what the tires are doing and what the impact the driver is putting into the steering wheel. And this is like the only concerning thing we saw that day that I was like, oh man, what's going on here? Some of this could be the electronic rack too. Like this could be the electronic rack. Maybe the electronic rack is on its way out, right? Because they've abused the hell out of these. I don't know what the problem is. So I do have this question out. This clip, I showed it to the Fox Factory team. I'm hoping we get a chance to sit down with them and talk about that clip. Because that out of everything we saw that day, this is the only thing that concerned me. Everything else is fixable. Everything else is, can be fixed with software. The fit and finish, it's not what you can do there. I'm sure we can do strategies down the road, like rubber stops to kind of stop some of the rattling and all that stuff. But this is the only one that I'm like, ooh, what's going on there? Based on our driving experience, that was a little confusing, right? It was a little too numb. Seeing the clips from the outside worried me a little bit. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
We took my mid-travel truck through the same trails, right? Like we took it through a section where the truck was going like crazy sideways. And mind you, my mid-travel truck bucks like crazy. I gotta get a different leaf pack in there, get a different tune there. But we took that section where it went side to side, and my truck didn't go side to side the way this truck did, right? And mind you, mine's mid-travel, conventional shocks, 2.5 coilovers with pipe pass up front, and then 4.0 in the back, right? So it's very conventional. There's no live valve, and mine ran pretty smooth through there. So it was kind of surprising to see the live valve truck not do it, because the live valve truck should technically be smoother to stuff like that. And then we also did the sandy section.
Yeah, this section you're seeing is not the sandy section where they let us do the drive-alongs. This is a different section.
The sandy section, let me see if I can get this up. So the sandy section, we only got some drone shots of it. So kind of put the sandy section, kind of put it up here, and it's basically just kind of us just kind of going through a grooved sandy section. It's deep sand, so if you stop, you're gonna get stuck. But it had deep whoops and all that stuff. And when I took my truck through there, I wasn't flying off the whoops like we were with this. So I think there is still some tweaking they need to do. Mind you, this didn't buck at all. But I did feel that I think they could probably improve the rebound control a little bit better, because in some areas we just kind of bounced off of a whoop and straight to the other one, and that's when I went full droop and ripped out the fender liners. I think they can still fix this though. To me, it wasn't too big of a deal that it was like, oh, this is a deal breaker. I think this is more of, I think the algorithm needs a little bit more work, right, to get that truck to ride better. Because like you didn't get to drive it on pavement, but I did. I got to drive it back to the shop. And when we first got back on the freeway, it was not a smooth ride. And I put it in comfort just to try to get that really cush ride, and it was not smooth. It was it took it about a good 5 minutes on the road before it smoothed out. That was also kind of weird too, and it kind of makes me think that maybe the sensor placement is not the best, and maybe the algorithm still needs some tweaking, right, on these trucks to get them to perform better. But again, this is stuff that they can improve. I think the only one that we really need to kind of talk to them about is the steering. The steering was kind of what the hell. It was a little too numb. All right, so the last piece to talk about is price. Price. What everybody's going like, up, hell no. $209,000 is huge. It's too much. It's too much for what this truck is. It's all bolt on. But you also have to look at the constraints they had for this project, right? They had to maintain the factory warranty. They could not do anything to violate that factory warranty. That was important to them to make this a viable truck that can have 3-year 36 and 6-year 60 powertrain warranties. It also had to ship globally. It had to retain all the factory components that allowed it to keep all its safety crash training. We also heard that they did some crash testing too, right? I think one of the guys said they did crash testing.
Yeah, I don't recall all the details. I know they did a lot of different testing on it to meet all the different markets and meet all the federal standards that they wanted to meet. There's a lot of cost that goes into that, a lot of time that goes into that. R&D and making all these components fit, finish, all that stuff that they've put into this project. I think that's where we're seeing the price discrepancy that most of you are pointing out.
Yeah, another project requirement was everything had to work. Everything OE had to work. Backup sensors, all that stuff had to work. So they had to make sure that was integrated. So that's why you're not seeing more lower profile bumpers. So that's why you're not seeing the frame be cut. It had to be supportable by any GM dealer worldwide. But another thing that kind of surprised me is like we asked what the base truck was. It's an RST is the base truck. Now I priced it out. And you're going to be surprised by how much this thing costs. An RST base is $54,700. And I just kind of optioned mine off with everything that was available, all like whatever the premium features were, 10-speed automatic and all that stuff. And I made sure I added that 6.2. That 6.2 is about a $3,800, $3,900 upgrade. Yeah. The base truck MSRP is $67,000. And it's actually $64,000 right now with the current incentives going on.
Okay.
So all the upgrades is how much?
Yeah.
And that's where I think a big disconnect is, because, okay, I'm thinking out the door, that's a $70,000 truck. So to get me to 210?
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of untangible things there.
$140,000.
Yeah, it's not cheap to, from my basic understanding of it, it's not cheap to get it through all of the different processes that they wanted the truck to go through, certified through.
There's a lot of development costs.
Yeah.
There's no denying the development costs. There's no denying the amount of mileage and testing they put into it. There's also no denying the amount of professionals they put into it. And they're also doing a very limited run this first year. They're limited to 500, just 500 trucks. So it's extremely limited run. So all that combined accounts for the price.
Does that translate to demand for this target buyer?
I think there's a demand for a LS-based Raptor. There's a demand for that, because I've wanted it for 10 years. When the Raptor first came out, I was more of a GM guy, and GM has yet to answer the call and bring out anything comparable. So there is that demand. Is this a $210,000 build? I don't think so. I think my opinion is this would have been better priced, around the same price as a Raptor R. Mind you, not counting all the development and all that stuff, I think this is closer to $110,000, $130,000 build altogether. It's not a $210,000 build, especially when you start looking at the components of the base truck is around $65,000, $70,000 out the door. All the components, front suspension, $7,000, right? Rear suspension, probably about $10,000.
Yeah,
Shocks is going to be pretty expensive, about $12,000.
Yeah, I mean, we tend as enthusiasts to view things through the lens of,
Yeah.
I could take this off the shelf, bolt it to my truck, and buy it. I think getting something bespoke like this, getting something that there's not going to be a huge quantity of, you're not going to see it like you do maybe a Gen 2 or Gen 3 roaming around on the streets all the time, so there's that uniqueness to it. I think that's the buyer this truck is aiming for, is to have something unique, exclusive. It's got tuning specifically to it, maybe above and beyond what you might see with a normal aftermarket part.
But,
you know,
I think if this was priced, say, $150, I think this would be a home run, and they'd be selling way more than 500 units.
Yeah, no, they could potentially expand it. You know, I think one of the advantages that an OE like Ford has is that economies of scale, where they can sell a bunch of these. There's no caps to that production. That makes, you know, the parts they get from their suppliers, especially after 3 generations, you know, they're able to get the price kind of in that sweet spot. Whereas, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because the Raptor R costs what it costs because they can make thousands of them. So,
yeah,
you know, Ford's going to make its money back. This is not a GM build, right? This is a Fox factory build, so it's a different economy of scale here. I think the price is too high for what it is. I know those that have to have it will get it.
Yeah.
And I don't think they'll have any problem selling the 500 units. The bigger thing that came out of this event for me is that I hope someday Fox Factory offers all these bolt-on pieces for sale to us. Because there is nothing that I saw here that I couldn't put on this truck in my driveway. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, right? Like the way all of this is designed, if they sold it in its component forms, anybody can build this in their driveway at a fraction of the cost. And I hope and pray that someday Brenthal's or Fox Factory or whoever made all these parts offers these as kits, like a rear kit, a front kit for these trucks so that we can build our own.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where this is kind of the use case or example that they want to put all these things out on display on and what they can do with it.
Yeah, what's possible.
Yeah, and then expand from there. I mean, they're aftermarket companies after all, so this was a good baseline to really see, hey, how does all this work together and what can we sell, what's in demand? They're going to do it in this cool showcase, and I think I'd rather see a industry and a world with something like the Fox Factory truck where, you know, these different companies are collaborating, they're making something. And I agree. I don't think they'll have a hard time selling the 500 units.
No, I don't think they have a hard time selling the 500 units, and I hope they do so they can eventually offer this as a bolt-on, because I would love to take an RST truck or even, you know, pick a higher option one, something with a nicer interior, right?
Yeah.
And build it myself, because I would love a GM power plant LS version of the Raptor. I think it'd be so awesome. And this thing is really cool. It's not perfect. They got little things to fix, but I think everything we showed here is fixable. These guys are professionals, they're passionate, and I think they could fix it. That all being said, the current model, the current one that's out there right now, 500 units, would you buy one if you had the money?
If I'm spending this much money on a truck, there are some wish list items I wish I'd see, but I still, in my eyes, I think the truck's a home run. I still think it's great that they, you know, took this approach, that they have it, and with all that in mind, I think if I had almost $250,000 to spend on a truck, if I'm spending that much money on a truck, I probably have, you know, a fleet of things going. I'd love to have it in my stable of vehicles. I think so.
I think for me, I would like to build one. I wouldn't buy it, mainly because of some of the other builds I've seen out there, right? Like one video that we got coming up is the HM Recon build, which is a fully linked, crazy build, non-cage. I think costs about the same. So for me, you know, because I know that exists, I love those kind of builds. Yeah. They're fully reinforced and they're amazing. For me, I wouldn't buy one, but if they offered all these pieces as bolt-on, I would so buy the pieces and build my own. I think it would be an awesome build to build with my kids, and it would be an amazing platform to have fun with the parts as they are now, and just hope they have some software updates to kind of fix the side-to-side and then fix that steering a little bit down the road.
Knowing them, they're definitely going to refine this. I think it's a
passionate team. I think that's one thing that really showed. These guys are really enjoying what they're doing, and they're just like us, right? They've been wanting to see a GM truck like this for years, and they wonder why it hasn't been released yet.
And, you know, something to be said about the people that go out and make it happen. You know, it's like we can all, you know, inject our thoughts and things, and, you know, we have some areas, some wish list items, but I think this is still a great package, a great starting point.
I agree. I agree. All right, guys. So what do you guys think about this build? Put it in the comments below. Don't beat them up too much on the price. I know it's expensive, but think about it in its components, forms, and what this is, right? It's one of the first few bolt-on link kit conversions out there, right? Yes, I know some people don't like it, but for what it is and what it's doing, it's pretty impressive, and I think it's really cool. And hope you guys like this video. Let us know your thoughts down below. All right. Big thank you to Josh for helping me do this video and keeping me honest.
Anytime, anytime.
And we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.